Welcome to Bizarre Podcast.
When I think of the era of silent cinema, there is one man who instantly springs to mind, and that is Sir Charles Spencer Chaplin, or as the world knows him, as simply Charlie Chaplin. Charlie was born on the 16th of April 1889, and unfortunately he was born into a hard life of poverty and hardship, and he was constantly sent to work in the workhouses from the young age of 7 years old. But Chaplin was destined for greater things, and eventually became a very successful actor, his most known character being the Little Tramp. He wanted the Little Tramp character to have a certain look that would look comical on the camera. Chaplin has often spoken about how his character came about, and here it is in his own words. On the way to wardrobe, I thought I would dress in baggy pants, big shoes, a cane and a derby hat. I wanted everything in contradiction. The pants baggy, the coat tight, the hat small and the shoes large. He stated that as soon as he was dressed and his makeup was applied, he could feel the character and had a good understanding of who the Little Tramp character was, and as soon as he walked out onto the stage, the character was born, and so was a popular pop culture character that we all know today. Now, Charlie's life was nothing short of inspirational, and he had become a worldwide icon. But today's story is not about the life of Charlie Chaplin. Instead, I'm going to be telling you about something shocking that happened after his death. I'm going to tell you about the time Charlie Chaplin's coffin was dug up and stolen in a shocking attempt to hold the body to ransom and demand money from Charlie's wife. Charlie Chaplin died on Christmas Day 1977 at his home in Switzerland at the age of 88 from a stroke that occurred in his sleep. Now, no day is a good day to die, but Christmas Day, I was actually shocked when I read that. He was buried only 2 days later on the 27th of December in a quiet cemetery by their home. But unfortunately for Una Chaplin, Charlie's wife, this would not be the last time her late husband would be laid to rest. It was only a few months later, on March the 2nd, 1978, local villagers were walking through the cemetery and made the shocking discovery. In the picturesque area where Chaplin's body had been buried, among the cypress trees overlooking the lake, with the mountain peaks in the far distance, a disturbed grave was discovered, and its contents were missing. Charlie Chaplin's body, along with his coffin, had been stolen. Una Chaplin received a phone call from the police, who had the unfortunate responsibility of informing her that her recently deceased husband's body had been dug up and stolen, and by who, they had no idea. Now, as soon as this hit the papers, there was many outlandish theories making the rounds. One of the theories was that crazed fans had actually stolen Charlie Chaplin's body to return him to his rightful burial place of England. There was also a conspiracy theory that Nazis had actually stole the coffin due to Chaplin's movie The Dictator. And then there was also a theory that Chaplin was Jewish and his body was stolen because some may have taken offence to a Jew being buried in a Christian graveyard. Now, of course, all these theories were proved ridiculous and false, but of course the real story was just as shocking. After a bit of investigation, it was decided that the heavy coffin had been taken from the ground by maybe 2, possibly 4 men, and due to the weight of the coffin, there were signs of indentations in the soil, which suggested that the coffin was dragged to a getaway vehicle and drove away into the night. The reason behind the theft still remained a mystery. No one had the slightest clue as to why this had been done. But it wasn't long before Una Chaplin received ransom instructions from the mysterious grave robbers. Firstly, Una Chaplin received a phone call off a man claiming to have the body of her husband. It wasn't long before Una also received a photograph through the post. It was a photograph of her husband's coffin. The thieves demanded that Una pay a ransom of 600,000 Swiss francs if she ever wanted the body of her late husband returned to her. If she refused, the grave robbers threatened to shoot her 2 younger children. Now, unfortunately for the grave robbers, Una thought this was absolutely ridiculous and called their bluff. You gotta admire this woman. She believed that her husband would have found it laughable and would never dream of handing over such an amount of money. And this is what she actually said in her own words. Charlie would have thought it rather ridiculous. And so she made the decision to not pay the ransom. Now, as you can imagine, for the grave robbers, this was bad news. This surprising road bump in the grave robbers' plans naturally made them nervous, and they actually started to negotiate on the price. The robbers had now dropped the ransom from 600 Swiss francs to only 100,000 Swiss francs. And the police agreed on this, and they agreed on a meeting place. The grave robbers demanded that the Chaplin chauffeur bring the ransom money to a quiet road in the family Rolls Royce, and there were to be strictly no police present. But of course the police would not send a member of public on a meetup, that could be dangerous, so they had the officer wear the chauffeur hat and drive to the meeting point. Now it's worth mentioning that I had heard another version of this botched up operation, where one of the police became suspicious of a passing postman. And the postman was also suspicious when he didn't recognise the original chauffeur in the Chaplin's Rolls Royce. And this is according to one account that I've seen on the internet. One of the police officers convinced himself that the postman was the thief and arrested the innocent postman. And this may be the reason that the meetup scared off the actual thieves, who could have seen the postman getting arrested from afar. According to one inspector who worked on the case, who was interviewed by the BBC, he recalls that there was also a call made shortly after from a man claiming to know the whereabouts of Chaplin's body, and he also provided an address. And as you can imagine, the police investigated this and arrived at the address, which was a house, and entered the building, only to find that they had been sent on a wild goose chase and had been subjected to a practical joke. The body was not there. Shortly after the failed attempt, the thieves arranged for a phone call to be made on the 17th of May at 9:30 AM to discuss renegotiations to receive the ransom. This time the police placed surveillance on Una's phone line and another 200 phone booths in the area in an impressive show of police work to try and find and catch the grave robbers and locate Charlie Chaplin's body once and for all. And thanks to the amazing effort put in by the police, the thieves were actually found at a payphone in Louisiana. The grave robbers were identified as two auto mechanics who went by the name Roman Warders and Gancho Ganev. The two auto mechanics were going through financial difficulties and had become desperate and came up with the idea of stealing Chaplin's body after hearing about a similar crime which had happened in Italy. Here's the story. The two men had indeed come in the middle of the night and dug up Charlie Chaplin's coffin and dragged the coffin to the getaway vehicle and drove away to a cornfield some distance away, about 10 miles, and dug out a shallow grave to hide the coffin until they had their ransom money. But originally, this was not the plan. The original plan was to dig up the coffin and remove it from the hole, and then dig a further few feet down in the hole, and then place the coffin back into the now deeper hole and cover it with just enough dirt to make it seem that the coffin had gone, when in fact it still remained, just hidden a few extra feet down. But for some reason, this just proved too difficult to accomplish, and they decided to hide the coffin in that field 10 miles away. This was not, as I say, the original plan. They never actually wanted the coffin to be in their possession whilst the ransom requests were being made. In the BBC interview that I mentioned earlier with the inspector, he recalls arriving in the cornfield with a number of police officers, spades in hand, ready to dig to find Charlie Chaplin's coffin. But unfortunately for the police, the two thieves couldn't remember exactly where they had buried the body. So, as you can imagine, there was probably quite a lot of digging that happened until they actually did find the body. After a while, the inspector's spade made contact with Charlie Chaplin's coffin, and the coffin was eventually lifted from the earth. The inspector opened up the coffin, which had unfortunately let in quite an amount of water, but there was no mistaking Charlie Chaplin's body inside. Apparently, he was very easy to recognise, and there was no doubt it was him. After being charged with grave robbery and extortion, the two men were given jail time. Warders, who was a mastermind behind the whole fiasco, was sentenced to 4 years in jail, whilst Ganev only got 18 months suspended sentence. Whilst in jail, the grave robbers wrote to Una apologising for all that they had put her through and begged her for her forgiveness. And amazingly, Una wrote back, and she wrote only 4 words, which were, "Look, all is forgiven." And to me, I found that absolutely amazing that she could find such forgiveness for such a horrible crime that they committed. I don't know if I could have been so forgiving, and Una Chaplin just sounded like a fantastic, wonderful person. Charlie Chaplin was reburied in the exact same plot, only this time Una requested a lot of wet concrete to be poured on top of the coffin, and eventually it dried, sealing Charlie Chaplin forever in his coffin and ensuring that his body would never again be stolen and Charlie Chaplin could finally rest in peace. And there you have it. That is a story of Charlie Chaplin and the body snatchers. I was amazed by this story. I'd never actually heard of it before. It was only a couple of months ago that I'd stumbled across it on the internet. I had no idea it had actually happened. I've got to say, I always knew of Charlie Chaplin. I think I'd watched a few of his films when I was young with my granddad. But it was a long time ago and I didn't really remember. I probably weren't even paying attention. But whilst I was researching this episode, I did go onto YouTube and I watched quite a few of his old films. Well, some clips from his old films, and I actually enjoyed them quite a lot. He was quite the entertainer. I actually went on Amazon after watching some of these clips and I've ordered a box set of Charlie Chaplin DVD movies to arrive so I can watch the movies in full. I actually recommend you go over to YouTube and just seek out some of these scenes. They are actually very, very good. Now, in the show notes, I will also put some of my sources from where I found out information for the story, and also the BBC interview that I mentioned. I'll put a link up to that so you can have a listen to it. It is very good. I found it very interesting to actually hear the story of this case in the inspector's own words. It was quite a good listen. And of course, as always, I'll be putting links into the description so you can find the website and the Facebook group and the Instagram and the Twitter. Now, before you go, I've actually got a bit more news for you before you leave. In the new year, I'm planning on launching a new podcast, which is very different to this one. The new podcast, we'll be talking about different subjects in pop culture. Now, as of yet, the podcast is still in the planning stages. I'm trying to plot out the structure of the actual episodes and what episodes I'm going to be doing and recording a few episodes. But what I have done, I've created a Facebook group, which I'll put a link in the description below, and I would love it if you were to join us if it sounds like something you're interested in. And from there, I can keep you updated on the progression of the podcast. And also, as a community on the Facebook page, we can all keep each other updated on the latest pop culture news. At the moment, I think I've posted some stories about Stranger Things, about Star Wars, and multiple other things as well. And I'd love for you to join us and contribute, just like you do on the Bizarre Podcast group. Oh, and I don't want you to worry, Bizarre Podcast is not going anywhere, and it will not be put on the back burner. I'm still going to pay as much attention to Bizarre Podcast as I will be doing in the future to the new podcast. So, the name of the new group is Pop Culture Pedestal, and as I said, I'll include the link below. So yeah, thanks very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And as always, I'll see you next time. Take care of yourself. Bye bye.